introduce our own City Club member and past member of the program committee, Ethan Seltzer. Ethan will be today's moderator. He was appointed in 1992 as the first director of the Institute of Portland Metropolitan Studies at the School of Urban and Public Affairs at Portland State University. In that capacity, he's responsible for developing a program of research and service that brings the resources of higher education to bear on the critical community issues of the six-county Portland Metropolitan Area. And I questioned whether he really meant 6 or 3 or what. And I was guessing, in addition to Clark, what the other 2 counties are. And they are, for those of you who are as ignorant as I was, Columbia and Yamhill County, in addition to our Tri-County close-in area and Clark County across the river. In addition, Ethan serves as a member of the faculty in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at PSU. Prior to joining the Institute, he was the land use supervisor for Metro, the regional government, and there he developed and helped to implement a program of regional urban growth management. Ethan received his undergraduate degree in biology from Swarthmore College in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania, and a master's in landscape architecture and regional planning, and a doctorate in city and regional planning from the University of Pennsylvania. He and his family have been residents of the Portland region for the past 17 years. He is currently a member of the Traffic Relief Options Advisory Committee, chair of the City of Portland Parking Meter Revenue Task Force, a member of the board of the Wetlands Conservancy, past president and former member of the board of the Oregon Environmental Council, and past president and member of the board of the 40 Mile Loop Land Trust. He has lent his professional volunteerism skills to the Oregon chapter of the American Planning Association and the Board of Reach Community Development. Please join me in welcoming Ethan Seltzer to the podium. He will introduce the rest of our panel members and explain the format for today. Ethan, welcome.
Thanks, Beth. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and to see so many folks in the audience this afternoon. This is a wonderful kind of strange time for our region. A lot is going on. Just the other day I received this newsletter in the mail from the Twin Cities Metropolitan Council, and the whole newsletter starts with the following: "Step aside, Portland. There's a bold new regional growth strategy on the national scene. The strategy is embodied in the Metro 2040 plan that the Metropolitan Council adopted in December." Well, I was surprised. I think this is kind of interesting. It's kind of wonderful, kind of strange in a way. My first reaction was that, it was great to see the Twin Cities Metropolitan Council benchmarking their efforts on the efforts of literally hundreds, if not thousands, of people in this region to come up with our own 2040 plan. But then when I read the fine print, I realized that when they said step aside, they meant that because their 2040 plan calls for over 200,000 acres of expansion, and that pretty soon they may be joining us here in the Willamette Valley. So it struck me that today's topic is particularly important, and it's important for not just the future of the region, but for the way in which we're all involved in making that future happen. It's very much a work in progress. Much remains to be done. And today what we wanted to do is to provide at least 2 views, and there are certainly many, I see many in this room, of where we are. We're inspired to bring this program to you really by a recent set of decisions at Metro regarding the urban reserves. And for those of you who are familiar with the private reserve and other kinds of products from Oregon that we associate with that term, urban reserves are areas to be designated outside urban growth boundaries for future urban expansion. And the notion is that by identifying those areas now, we will take the pressure off agricultural land that shouldn't have the pressure on it, and that will help service providers and jurisdictions inside the boundary know a little more exactly where they need to be planning for their future growth. So it's a good time to take stock, and we have with us today 2 speakers who will help us do that. Our first speaker this afternoon will be Susan McLain. Susan is a Metro councilor, has been since 1991. She's the chair of the Growth Management Committee, chair of the Water Resources Policy Advisory Committee, or WARPAC, to those of you who are involved over at Metro, member of the Metro Policy Advisory Committee, member of many other committees, as a matter of fact, and putting a lot of time into really making things happen here in the region. She's a teacher at Glencoe High School, lives in Forest Grove, is a sixth-generation Oregonian, and we're delighted to have you with us. Also with us this afternoon is Robert Liberty. Robert was born and raised in the Portland, Oregon Metropolitan Area. That's a broad kind of address, but you know what the heck, it works for me. Between 1981 and 1990, he was a staff attorney at Thousand Friends of Oregon. And from January 1991 to April 1994, he had a solo land use law and consulting practice. In April of 1994, he succeeded Henry Richmond as 1000 Friends of Oregon's second executive director. He's a member of Metro's Future Vision Commission and serves as an ex officio member of the steering committee of the Coalition for a Livable Future. Today what we're going to do is kind of a modified debate format. Susan and Robert will each have 3 minutes for an opening statement. Susan will speak first, and then after those statements I will ask the same 4 questions of each of them, alternating who gets to go first. And then they'll have 3 minutes for a closing statements. Don Williams has volunteered to be our timekeeper. He's very tough with the stopwatch, and so we'll be making sure that we have plenty of time at the end for questions from both Don and City Club members. So with that, please welcome Susan McLain for her 3-minute opening statement.
I would like to thank the City Club for having this timely subject matter in front of you for this luncheon today. I think it's extremely important for all of us to realize that growth management is an ongoing process. It is an ongoing responsibility, and it's going to be an ongoing refinement. I want you to picture for a minute that beginning in the 1840s, thousands of pioneers made an arduous 2,000-mile trek along the Oregon Trail to rivers and valleys with rich farmlands and forests. Today, people are still attracted to this region for its jobs, for several of its most beautiful icons, and for a culture of livability. Simply put, this is a great place to live, and we want to keep it that way. This description of Oregon, I believe we can all agree, is realistic. To keep it that way, though, we must be more creative than we've been in the past. The problem is that we have values that can sometimes be conflicting. We must work to build and improve communities, and we must do this in new ways. We need new transportation systems, new intermodal connections, we need better land use decisions, and we need to remember that both urban and rural areas must protect and support open spaces, healthy stream corridors, and work for better water quality. Now, everyone in this room that came today knows that. That's the goal. As Metro and their local partners studied the possibilities for the 2040 growth concept, for achieving these goals, it was clear that growing that way and the way we had in the past was not going to work very well. It also indicated in those studies that if we don't move the urban growth boundary at all, we've got problems with affordability and we've got problems in congestion, because the congestion would come from density in the wrong places. But what we needed instead, not doing as we had in the past, not doing as we could in the future of just holding it completely, was a balanced, compact form that strives to keep a vision of jobs and homes and green infrastructure for all communities. Citizens on a Future Vision Commission, which I sat on and also Robert Liberty did, indicated that they knew that there were interconnected values that were essential to facing the future wisely. There had to be, though, a spirit of cooperation and ongoing partnerships, and that's what we're involved in today. Many of these sentiments that I've just told you are directly from that Future Vision document. They wanted to try and develop the values like life close to nature, vibrant, economically diverse communities, neighborhoods with unique reputation and sense of place, and being stewards of the region's natural resources. Those were the goals again, but to make them reality, we had to make choices and figure out what the trade-offs were. The long-term effect of the metro-urban reserves and the urban growth boundary decision is immense for the overall ability for those communities to be full services, vibrant regional centers, complete town centers, efficient main streets, and productive agricultural inventory that can be used for farming, and also areas of pristine natural open spaces for wildlife and humankind. The tools of the UGB and the urban reserves will help us reach these goals and these values. Robert and I agree on a lot of things. Sometimes we don't just quite agree on how to get to the same product. And I think that's what we're going to discuss today. As I look out here in this room, I see many of the friends, the citizens, and also the local jurisdiction partners who have been there on this discussion throughout this entire time. And we're here to say, Chapter 3, let's get going. Urban reserves are up.
The discussion today before the City Club and in our region is much broader and more important than just about the expansion of the metropolitan urban growth boundary. At its root are profound issues about the patterns of growth and the institutions of representative democracy in America. If that claim seems exaggerated, consider that as of this decade, the majority of Americans like us now live in metropolitan areas with populations of 1 million or more. We are now a metropolitan nation. Metropolitan areas are the defining reality of our landscape, our economy, our society. But outside of this region, there are no institutions of representative democracy to give Americans the ability to make decisions about their metropolitan areas. At the metropolitan level in America, no one is in charge and no one can be held accountable. If the citizens of the Detroit or the Los Angeles or the Chicago metropolitan areas had been given the choice in 1950 or 1960, how many of them would have chosen the future that exists today? Would most Americans then, or now, choose to live in regions where an ever-widening ring of sprawl covers the countryside and surrounds an ever-widening core of decaying central cities and older suburbs? This disastrous pattern of metropolitan sprawl and decay has become so widespread that Americans, most Americans, think it is inevitable. It is accepted with a kind of fatalism that is at odds with Americans' old view of themselves as problem solvers and innovators. But that fatalism is finally being challenged. Today, regional growth management is a hot topic of public discussion and debate from Atlanta to Albuquerque, from Salt Lake City to Kansas City to New York City. These discussions about regional planning lead inevitably to questions of governance, how to involve citizens to make decisions at a regional level. And I can note that last week in the Twin Cities, the Minnesota State Legislature passed a law that will make the Twin Cities Met Council elective. Across the country, people engaged in these discussions are looking toward our metropolitan region for answers to their questions about metropolitan growth and governance. They look to us because we have a very different set of civic assumptions and institutions. We have come to believe that the fate of our separate neighborhoods, cities, and counties are linked to the fate of all the other neighborhoods, cities, and counties in the region. We believe that growth should and can be managed. We believe we are entitled to make decisions about our region's future. And we make those decisions through a directly elected democratic institution with a metropolitan perspective, a metropolitan authority, and a metropolitan constituency. Our region is the test case, the model for solutions to America's problems of metropolitan growth and governance. For this reason, what Metro does in managing growth and how it does it is of national significance. And for that reason, we should expect Metro to make decisions which in substance and process reflect their national importance.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to a series of questions, and we will alternate the who gets to answer first. Susan, why don't we start with you on the first question. In the next 20 years, what is the role of urban reserves in accomplishing the 2040 growth concept?
Urban reserves provides the balance. I think that's the statement, that's the key. The Metro 2040 growth concept was the result of careful consideration of the Metro Council and also of its local partners, its advisory groups. It sought to match making better use of already committed land inside of the urban growth boundary with some limited expansions of the urban growth boundary. As Robert said today, we pride ourselves in remembering that the urban growth boundary is a tool for a better way of life in Oregon. Remember, first of all, that we expect to accommodate 1/3 of our new jobs and 1/4 of our new housing through redevelopment, recycling existing land within the current urban growth boundary. The Metro Council has adopted only 18,579 acres of urban reserves. This is a 7% increase to accommodate 700,000 additional people. Remember that this is to last for up to 43 years. Our public decision, we had over 40 volumes of written testimony of over 10,000 pages. This was not an easy decision, but we're already a success story if you read the national papers, as Robert pointed out. It indicated also in a book I read recently, David Rusk, author of Cities Without Suburbs, that in this period of 1980 to 1990, Chicago increased the urban area by 46% and the population only increased 4%. Seattle grew in the area of 87% of population growth of only 38%. And our region, in contrast, has a 16% increase with a 25% increase in population. Remember that Urban Reserves really believes that we can do it differently because of the master planning that the Metro Council has now in its Metro Code that went along with the acreage that we're talking about. That Metro master planning includes many things. That includes planning for schools, for natural areas. It also includes the kind of master planning that would be done that we figure out where we're going to pay for the infrastructure before the houses and the people and the needs are there. So urban reserves, how do they fit in? They fit in because they bring balance. Balance for everyone and balance for all issues and concerns.
Thank you, Susan. Robert.
The purpose of urban reserves is to identify those lands to be added to the regional urban growth boundary in the next 20 to 50 years when and if a need for more land's been established. That's a state-mandated process that I think makes good sense, although I do think it's a mistake to require reserves as far out as 50 years. If the urban reserves are kept as reserved lands and not added to the urban growth boundary in the near term, I think they will do no harm to achieving the 2040 growth concept. But if significant amounts of reserved lands are added to the boundary in the near term, it will mean we're not going to follow through with the part of the growth concept that encourages infill and redevelopment. It will mean that we're giving up on the strategy of building up instead of out. It will endanger much that we've already accomplished. If the urban reserves are used the way they should be, they will take some of the development pressure off the lands outside the boundary, not designated as reserves. And if development in the urban reserves is planned carefully, they can provide a model for good development here and around the state and the country. And I'll have a bit more to say on the subject of development in the urban reserve areas in response to question 4.
Thank you, Robert. And my thanks, too, to both speakers so far for holding to the time limit. Robert, let's start with you on the second question. What is the effect of Metro's urban reserves decision on farmland preservation in the greater Portland metropolitan region?
The designation of more than 18,000 acres of urban reserves that includes more than 3,000 acres of highly productive farmland was a tremendous setback for farm and forest protection in this region. That's why the Washington County Farm Bureau, the Oregon Farm Bureau Federation, and the Oregon Department of Agriculture have all filed appeals of Metro's decision to the Land Use Board of Appeals. The fact is that there's more than 100,000 acres of land in Washington, Clackamas, and Multnomah County outside any urban growth boundary that's already zoned for rural residential, rural commercial, or rural industrial development. That is equal to 40% of all the land inside the regional urban growth boundary. Most, if not all of this land, is close to the urban growth boundary. As a matter of both law and logic, to the extent we need to add land to the urban growth boundary, those lands should be used first before we add any land that is zoned for farm or forest use. But the bad effects of Metro's decision on farm and forest land protection goes far beyond the potential urbanization of 3,000 acres of farmland. The decision creates uncertainty in the minds of farmers at the urban edge about whether they really have a future in farming. Why should they continue to invest in improvements to their land or new equipment if their land's going to be swept into the UGB? Why not sell out to a speculator equipped with a lobbyist who is gambling on the next round of UGB expansions? And it sets a bad example statewide. 50 miles south of here, the Oregon legislature has before it 187 bills and resolutions relating to land use, many of them to weaken the laws protecting farm and forest lands. It is a favorite argument in the Capitol that it's unfair for the state to ask Deschutes County or Klamath County or Union County to protect their less productive range and farmlands if Portland is free to sprawl out onto prime farmland. This region is accused of hypocrisy on the subject of farmland protection every day the legislature is in session. The Metro Council's decision on urban reserve has weakened the cause of farmland protection statewide.
Susan.
Thank you. This is where, again, Robert and I agree on the goal, but we have a little bit different perspective of the facts. First of all, we would like you to think that as you look at the numbers, that you need to understand that we are really basically 99% farm-free in those urban reserves. That is, the Metro Council designated, as Robert indicated, over 18,500 acres, and only 3,000 of those acres are exclusive farm use, and only 1,000 of those 3,000 acres are not surrounded by urban or exception land. Within the development of all the urban reserves, there are 230,673 acres of urban reserves. Of rural reserves. That means land that will never be urbanized. So I think the farm community does have a better certainty of understanding where they will always farm and where those forests will always be protected. In other words, in all 3 counties, it's 99% of the existing total. In spite of the intense pressures of the prime farmland in Washington County, it remains basically untouched and protected. I live in Forest Grove. They didn't get any urban reserves because it is completely surrounded by EFU. I go to church in Cornelius. They didn't get any urban reserves because it's surrounded by EFU, prime EFU. In Hillsborough, they didn't get all of the urban reserves they wanted because, again, there is a critical agricultural mass that's there that's needed to preserve that best farmland. In polls we've taken, we know that the 2 elements that the general public believes more than anything else, it is protect the agricultural community, and it is being protected in a better way because they no longer have piecemeal amendments that come to the Metro Council in an application process. Also, you need to know, the state agency, the LCDC board, changed the urban reserve rule to clarify that special needs criteria was available to help with the job housing balance that's part of that 2040 growth concept. We are protecting farms, we are protecting forestry, and it's better protected than it is under the status quo because you can actually see it in the 2040 growth concept as being part of those rural reserves.
Thank you, Susan. And let's move to the third question then, asking Susan first, what is the future for the partnership between Metro and local governments after this urban reserves decision?
Ethan told me I was supposed to have a joke or two, and so I don't know when I'm supposed to fit those in, but I think that this is as close as you're going to get as a joke. First of all, I believe that reasonable people can disagree. I think that's what the City Club is all about, and I think that's what democracy is all about, and I think that's what public policy is all about. Secondly, the urban reserve rule is complicated, and there are many parties that have to be considered. The property owners, the governing jurisdictions, the general public, and all of them are split on issues of density, infill, and what provides good variety of options for affordable housing and lifestyle choices. The council and its local partners have had to sift through these complicated trade-offs and balances to try and achieve the goals that we've indicated are important to all of us in this region today. We have succeeded, and let's start there. What is the relationship going to be in the future? Let's look at the past. We succeeded with the 2040 growth concept. We succeeded with the functional plan. The local partners championed and supported those documents and those works. Urban reserve decisions are difficult, and they're going to continue to be difficult. As Robert pointed out, look at the legal record of the parties on both sides of the appeals in the urban reserve case. You've got 13 parties who are intervening on both sides. That's complicated. The future is bright for the relationship. The local jurisdictions, both the cities and the counties and Metro, know the importance of staying focused on the goals of trying to continue for the livability that we cherish. It's going to be a good relationship because we want it to be. It's going to be a partnership because we understand what will happen if we don't work together. We're busy right now refining the large and the small differences with our partners. They include amendments to the functional plan, for example, Title III, quality of water and flood mitigation. That probably will go on for another 8 months before we actually have agreement with the partners. The first tier work on urban reserves, we asked the local jurisdictions what was the easiest to serve. That was part of our criteria, and we're continuing to work on that. We want it to work. And as a sixth-generation Oregonian, I know, that we pride ourselves in making it work. And in 90% of the package, we do agree.
Robert.
In the 7 years between the beginning of Metro's work on the 2040 growth concept and the Metro executive's recommendations on urban reserves last year, I watched a tremendous shift in the attitudes of local officials around the region on how the metropolitan area should grow. They moved a long way, much farther than I ever imagined, toward a common vision on how growth should occur and an acceptance of the changes their own communities needed to make in order to achieve that vision. This shared vision and commitment was fostered by and based on rapport and understandings that have been established between local governments and Metro. That rapport and trust between local governments and Metro is critical because while Metro sets the regional planning objectives, it is local governments which have the responsibility for carrying them out. Metro can set density objectives or expand the urban growth boundary, but it's local governments that have to change local zoning or provide the service as an expansion area. The content of the Metro Council's decision on urban reserves and the way they made that decision damaged the critical relationship between Metro and local governments. The Oregonian compared the Metro Council's approach to choosing urban reserves to taking a child into Toys R Us and telling her she could have everything in the store which her parents didn't specifically veto. This led to such absurd results as the absence of any real public debate by the councilors on the inclusion of the hundreds of acres of prime farmland at the St. Mary's site, even though we knew that there had been plenty of private discussion with the lobbyists for the developers. And willy-nilly, the council designated far more urban reserves than anyone expected, almost 19,000 acres, more than even the home builders have been talking about. For those of us observing the process, it appeared to be focused around personal agendas at best or totally irrational at worst. The whole process undermined the trust of participating local governments and the confidence of citizens who were hoping that the Metro Council was thinking about the long term in the region, not the interests of particular property owners or some future political move. To restore that trust, the Council must do a better job when it comes to the question of urban growth boundary expansions.
And now our fourth question, Robert. What issues should be the basis for Metro's coming decision on whether and how much to actually expand the urban growth boundary?
State law establishes the criteria for when and how much to expand the urban growth boundary. The primary issue is need. Do we need more land for housing, for jobs, for public uses? There's some very good news in the most recent, and I understand, preliminary figures on development in the region released by Metro staff at the end of last month. They show that we are meeting the 2040 objectives for housing and employment density already, or that we are close to meeting them, and in some cases we are surpassing those objectives. For example, new development needed to achieve an overall, the 2040 vision requires an average density of 5.7 dwellings per acre. That's for all types of housing. In the 1992 to 95 period, new development averaged only 4.3 dwelling units per acre. But in the last year of that period, new development was occurring at 6.3 dwellings per acre, higher than our target, and it's probably higher now. Under the 2040 growth concept, 27.5% of the new development needed to come from infill and redevelopment, but we're already at 29%. Because we are meeting these targets, there's no need to rush to expand the urban growth boundary. But in addition to the question of need, there's another factor that needs to be considered. When we decide whether and when to expand the boundary, we must take into account the character of proposed development and expansion area. Development and expansion areas must include housing for citizens of modest means, as well as the middle class and wealthy. There should be places for jobs, land for parks and open space, and commercial uses within walking distance of homes. Children ought to be able to get to their primary school by walking, and their parents ought to be able to buy a pint of milk without burning a pint of gas. In other words, we should be building well-rounded neighborhoods in expansion areas, not another round of suburban sprawl. And I think market competition can make this possible.
Susan.
Thank you. First of all, I think that question number 3 and question 4 are related, and so I would like to respond a little bit to what Robert said as far as the reaction of the local jurisdictions. Sitting on the Growth Committee as chair and also on the council, I want you to know that there wasn't one voice. One of the reasons the urban reserves was more difficult than some of the other work that Robert and I have agreed on today, which was the goals and the visions and the ideas of keeping livability, was the fact that after we got done with the goals and we started looking at what impact did it have to individual cities and counties and neighborhoods, people started taking their viewpoint back to their own neighborhood and saying, well, I believe in this every place except for right here in my neighborhood. I believe in this goal, except I don't want you to change my community. And because of that, we didn't just have an advisory group of impact that was able to come in with one voice. We had 10 or 11 minority reports that were quite extensive. Because of that urban reserve decision, unlike Robert's comment about it being willy-nilly. It was very difficult, very well reserved, and as a decision that had to be reviewed again and again to make sure we took in all the considerations. So to question 4, what issues should be the basis for Metro in the upcoming urban growth boundary decisions? First of all, we've got to figure out how to make all of the communities full service and successful. We cannot ignore the minority reports. We cannot ignore the fact that transit does not reach every community. We cannot ignore the fact that some communities are completely surrounded by farmland. We cannot ignore the fact that some of the cities are out of balance with jobs and houses. So it's extremely important for us to review all of those facts carefully before we go on to an urban growth boundary decision. Robert is correct. State law and the 2040 growth concept are going to frame this debate. The collective effort of the executive officer at Metro, who I work well with and feel strongly supports these concepts, and we can agree to disagree on a few issues, but major issues he supports. This collective effort of the council and our other local partners is still in process. How do we make those decisions? We continue and we complete the conversation. Master planning is the key. If you look at the urban reserve rule in the Metro Code that we put along with that decision, the master planning was never in place before, and that's why it's better than the status quo. Master planning will help us make all of those communities full service and still give lifestyle choices.
Thank you very much, Susan. And now we'll move to closing statements. Robert, your 3-minute closing statement.
Our region's citizens, city and county officials, and our elected Metro executive have demonstrated remarkable leadership in working together to describe and to achieve a common regional future. As judged by their votes on funding for regional light rail, on regional green spaces acquisition, and in the Metro executive race, the electorate has shown their willingness to support a new approach to growth. This is not to say that their support is unconditional or uncritical, nor should it be. Our fellow citizens are right to be careful, even skeptical about how much or how well their money will be spent on transportation improvements or parks and open spaces. They are right to be cautious about whether a strategy emphasizing more compact growth and infill and redevelopment will compromise the quality of life in their neighborhoods. But all in all, I believe our fellow citizens continue to be willing to engage in this discussion about our region's future and to support the region's efforts to prevent our region from sprawling out or decaying within, as has happened in all other metropolitan areas. Leadership has also been provided by a remarkable complement of suburban mayors. Gussie McRobert of Gresham, Craig Lomnicki of Milwaukee, Charlotte Leon of Wilsonville, Rob Drake of Beaverton, Mike O'Brien of Forest Grove. If someone had told me in 1989 that in 8 years the mayors of these 5 cities would have reached consensus on the need for a tight urban growth boundary, on the need to increase alternatives to the automobile, and to support new patterns of development that emphasize more efficient use of land and a greater mixture of uses, I would have laughed. If I had heard that they would have the support of several county commissioners and Charlie Hales as a former homebuilder lobbyist, I would probably have called the FBI hotline to report illegal use of controlled substances. Finally, we need to recognize the important role that has been played by Mike Burton. He has supported the thorough and creative work of John Fregonese and other staff members in developing the 2040 growth concept. He has provided the Metro Council with thoughtful recommendations, best statistical information available to him. He has been a tireless public educator about the objectives and content of the 2040 growth concept. The support of the citizens, of local officials, and the Metro executive are what has earned this region its leadership position. Now it is time, past time, for the Metro Council to demonstrate to the region that it can build on that leadership, that it can demonstrate a seriousness of purpose and a quality of decision-making that will restore public confidence in the nation's most important experiment in regional growth and governance.
Thank you, Robert. Susan, your closing statement, please.
I was first of all going to thank the partners who have been working with us for all of these years, and some of them have been working as long as 8 or 9 years with the Metro government before I was there working on these issues, but Robert already did that, so I'm going to go on. The Metro Council has been working for specifically 4 years on the urban reserves, and as the text of the future vision statement stated on the commission that Robert and I worked on, the relevant question is not when carrying capacity will be exceeded, but how we will collectively restore and maintain and enhance the qualities of the region, central to sustaining our health, the quality of natural environment, and the ability of future generations to meet the needs of their times. Remember that the urban reserves, though, are only part of the picture. The 2040 growth concept, rural reserves, town centers, main streets, regional centers, and open spaces are also important for the completion of this vision. We continue to support our partners in their community and neighborhood effort to retain sense of place and livability. The question we must ask ourselves is how we continue to be part of the solution. The answer is to work together. Some people only know how to call names like pipsqueak or threaten violence like rider trucks sitting outside of buildings. But my grandfather, Alvin Hobart, who was a member of this city club, once indicated that he believed wholeheartedly in your mission, the mission to inform its members and the community in public matters and to arouse the realization of obligation to citizenship. He always told me it is the citizens and all elected officials alike's responsibility to make government work. And if we continue to have that pledge, we will continue to try and hold tight that urban growth boundary, not as a line, but as part of a concept that includes those other vision areas that I've mentioned. The Metro Council will take on Robert's plea, and that is, remember that this is serious work and we need to try and make it as compact and as closed as we can to having a compact urban forum. In the 18,000 acres that we have there in urban reserves, if the functional plan works and the local jurisdictions are able to provide the density that's still livable that they say they can, much of that 18,000 acres will never be brought into the urban growth boundary. And one final statement that I agree with Robert on, and that is it's the stepping of the urban growth boundary, it's the use of the urban reserves, not as numbers and acres, but of when it's needed and necessary for good lifestyles and for livability that will continue to protect the streams, the floodplains, and allow us to protect both our natural physical environment and also the lifestyles and the vital economic environment of our people. We believe as a council, and I as a councilor, that that is a very important responsibility to live out the land use promises that we started in Oregon many years ago. And I thank you for providing us this time to be with you today.
Thank you, Susan. I'd like to ask you now to join me in thanking our speakers. We will now move to questions from City Club members at the mic, but Don, you've been very quiet down there, and I think you have the privilege of asking the first question.
I wanted to ask Susan if she wanted to give her joke now. Okay. Legislation has been proposed to significantly change the structure and the function of the Portland Metropolitan Area Boundary Commission, and many people are concerned about this and its effect on the urban reserves. What I'd like to know from each one of you is what is your position on this legislation and how do you feel it will affect those reserves?
I'm not familiar with the legislation, so I'm not in a position to give you my opinion. There's, after all, 187 bills to track. You know, you've got to set priorities.
I guess my response would be, Don, that first of all, the Boundary Commission work with the impact group was done in a subcommittee that I sat on as a liaison from the Metro Council. I thought that the Metropolitan Advisory Committee came up with some pretty good standards as far as how to make sure that the Boundary Commission would work with and in tandem with the 2040 growth concept. I have a lot of faith in what the local jurisdictions did with those ideas. They brought them to Metro. We passed them on pretty much 99% pure and indicated our support at the legislature. I think that they will enhance and provide for, again, continuing to show the connected elements of the 2040 growth concept within those 24 cities and the 3 or 4 counties. So I believe it's a benefit. We have tried to stay out of it. We'd prefer to have the special districts and the local jurisdictions that are going to have to deal with a majority of it to go down and give their feelings to the legislature.
Questions from City Club members?
Yes, hi, John Charles, City Club member. What's not often stated and wasn't stated today is that in order to have this debate, the proponents of the 2040 plan have already assumed that the nearly 12,000 acres of farmland now in tax-deferred status inside the boundary will be converted to some other use. Now, personally, I like urban farmland. I like it just as much as rural farmland. And it's not clear to me why you would argue so much about 3,000 acres way out in the periphery when not only are your whole plan is premised on the conversion of urban farmland. So I guess my question is mostly to Susan, although Robert as well. Why do you think people of Portland will be better off if we convert urban farmland so we can protect farmland on the periphery? I've never quite understood that.
John, when the urban growth boundary was set between 79 and 81, there was a long process of determining how much land was needed. Everyone knew from the beginning it was going to include farmland. That was the starting assumption. We were not going to accommodate all of the growth through infill or redevelopment. The farmland inside the boundary now, not all of it, but a lot of it is surrounded by development. It has services like major arterials, road arterials, sewage and water facilities around it. It is slated for development. It has been slated for development. So to us, that issue was decided 16 or 17 years ago. And I think farmers understand that. It's not going to help things to save the 12,000 acres, then add another 12,000 acres out at the edge, and it will end up being more expensive to serve that way.
The only thing I'd like to add to that is the practicality. I was raised on a farm in Clackamas County, and I just recently visited one of the only dairies left inside of the urban growth boundary in that area. There are practicalities. This wonderful farm family has 80 cows that they milk 4 hours in the morning and 4 hours at night, but because of the urbanization that's surrounding them, they can't continue. And so I think we need to understand that it's already gone from the 12,000 acres down to 7,000 acres. Metro's trying to balance that loss, though, of the green space or that active farmland with our green space measures, and we're trying to acquire urban green space so that there still is the ability to have that green within the urbanized area.
I think, and this is part of a larger issue about where farming takes place. Farming is an industry. There's a lot of chemicals, there's smells and noise. It may look peaceful, but if you've lived near an industrial operation, you know it doesn't always make the best neighbor. And for the farmers who are going to try and continue to farm with high-density development next to them, their costs are going to go up, and it's not going to be practical to continue farming. So I think green spaces are an essential part of the plan for the future inside the urban growth boundary, and we need to keep nature near us. But that's very different than having operating commercial farms in the city.
Next question, please.
Steve Buckstein, City Club member. Mr. Liberty mentioned, and I think Commissioner McLain acknowledged this too, that the 2040 plan, the urban growth boundary, is an experiment, that it hasn't been done elsewhere in the country, that we're trying to change things from what's happened elsewhere in the country. But with my scientific background, when I hear experiment, there's objective criteria to determine at some point when the experiment has succeeded or when it's failed. I think we all agree we'd know when it succeeded, but my question, I guess, and primarily to Commissioner McLain, because she's the one up there that really can vote directly on this experiment, what would be the criteria and when would be the time period to know if this experiment fails? How high would housing prices have to go within the urban growth boundary, for example, before we declared the experiment failed? How congested would traffic have to get in the urban growth boundary before we declared the experiment failed and looked for other solutions?
Sir, we are working on something that are called performance measures right now, and we have a subcommittee from our advisory group that met for the first time in an official way just this week. And we are dealing with those very issues, looking at the indicators in the performance measure and the evidence and the data that we will have to collect on our functional plan goals to see if this has been a worthy effort, to see if we have reached our goals, and to see what the corrective actions might be if we don't. Now, one of the elements that the local jurisdictions are most interested in is what do we do when we have figured out that the data that we've collected gives us a certain result. Does the corrective action come from the local jurisdiction? Does the corrective action, is it a regional corrective action? Do we change the goals of the functional plan and some of the planning devices? What do we do? I would say that we're not waiting. We're in the middle of that debate right now, and it has to happen. We have to give the functional plan at least, a year to 18 months to work before we can collect the data. But we're in the process of deciding how to collect it, what to do with it, and what the results of that evidence will be.
I disagree with the premise that we don't have any way of measuring our performance. The experiment's been run in all the other metropolitan areas, and you judge it by its results. It's a failure. I think that's the reason there are discussions around the country, is people are very unhappy what's happening in their regions. They don't like it. Will we find the perfect solution? I doubt it. Can we improve our performance? I think we already are. So I also want to address this charge that the urban growth boundary is the cause of rising home prices. Here are statistics from the National Association of Realtors September Real Estate Outlook, September 1996, and lot prices from the Urban Land Institute from 1996. All right, Denver. Denver really has done a great job in containing sprawl, hasn't it? Really compact growth. Home price, $132,000. Portland, $139,000. Reno, $139,000. Salt Lake City, $124,000. San Diego, $173,000. Bay Area, $270,000. Seattle, another leader in sprawl containment, $164,000. And if we look at lot prices alone, for example, we're at about $50,000. That's more than Phoenix. It's more than Denver. It's less than Salt Lake City. It's less than the Bay Area, and it's quite a bit less than Seattle. So I reject the premise that the urban growth boundary or land constraints are the cause of high home prices. Any area that grows rapidly has rapidly rising home prices, whether they have a planning process or not, whether it's Los Angeles or Portland. In fact, what this region did was increase housing supply by changing zoning without increasing land supply. Land supply at most is 25% of the cost of new housing. For multifamily, it's down to below 10%. And finally, this was the real test. At an annual meeting of the home builders, where I was the sacrificial lamb, I was inside the growth boundary. You don't have to keep an agricultural product going, you know. And, I said, well, let's say that we increase the urban growth boundary by 10,000 acres. Now, you're going to reduce prices, aren't you, to pass along that saving to the purchasers? There was a silence. You have high demand, they'll charge what the market will bear no matter what the components are. So I think the citizens, in fact, polling confirms this. They're asked, do you think keeping a tight urban growth boundary would affect increased home prices? 58% said yes. Then you said, do you think expanding the urban growth boundary will reduce home prices? 58% said no. So I think there's a lot of common sense there that increasing land supplies has not reduced home prices in Los Angeles or Reno or Salt Lake City, and it won't do it here either.
I'd just simply like to add that, as the next speaker comes up, that another way to, I think, have a sort of a bellwether on if the experiment is worthy or not is to have outsiders come in and look at it. And it's been unbelievable. In just the last 2 weeks, we have had people here from Russia, Japan, Mexico, inquiries from Cedar Rapids, Salt Lake City, Toledo, Spokane, all coming down to take a look at the successes we've had. So I guess I would agree with Robert that the premise that it is a failure or will be a failure is probably not well founded.
Another question there at the microphone.
Moshe Lenski, member. The master planning and the urban growth boundary, it seems to me, are dependent on what happens within the urban growth boundary, what's occurring, and also very dependent on public support. So my question is, when, not just on government decisions by governmental bodies, my question is, when is the process going to focus on organizing in neighborhoods, the most local unit where people have a sense of place, in order to get the acceptance, the understanding, and the participation necessary for that public support? People live in neighborhoods, they don't live on main streets and arterials.
I think that's an excellent question. And I remember a discussion we had with some architects who were doing some infill and redevelopment projects, all of whom had used public discussion with neighbors to help develop their projects. And I told one of the architects, I said, you know, there's a widely held belief that unless we prevent citizens from participating and stop them from filing appeals, we'll never achieve these densities, this compact growth. They said, that's odd. My view is just the opposite. We're never going to achieve this compact growth unless we involve the neighbors. And I think there's been way too much discussion about people's motives and describing people as NIMBYs who are acting in good faith to maintain qualities in their neighborhood. I know from experience not all those people are opposed to density, but it is logical to ask neighbors how to accomplish these objectives. I think we need to follow through with making sure there's affordable housing in all parts of the region, that we waste less land as we grow. I think we can ask the neighborhoods to participate in that decision-making, and we'll get good ideas from that kind of discussion. And that is a missing piece of the work going on now.
What I'd like to add to that, I'm a school teacher from Glencoe High School part-time, and so I think that the answer to that is start with the kids. I basically had a conversation the other day in a meeting where we were talking about rideshare and transit use, and the speaker said, you know, I don't know how much we can move you adults quickly because you're pretty set in your ways, but we can change the behavior of young people. And he had produced 3 card games, one after Go Fish, which was called Go Rideshare, and the other one was dealing with Stuck, which was like Old Maid, and if you were the loser, you got the Stuck card because you were stuck in traffic. And I think that part of that education has to start with those children. Another element that was really useful, I think, at Metro recently, we had kids from Beaver Creek, West Lynn, and Mount Tabor come in and talk about what they hoped to be able to do when they were leaders in their communities. And they compared their communities and compared their issues, pro and con, on what they had in the way of difficulties to overcome. So start with the ethic, whether it be a recycling ethic or a road rideshare ethic. You need to start with the young ones and get them to help us. We're not going to finish it in this generation. We know that.
Thank you. We've got time for a couple of quick questions here. One more there at the
Andrew
microphone.
Wheeler, somewhat a follow-up. It interests me in how we're going to settle and have better places to settle and a better life. You know, what's it going to look like? We know what it looks like now with the pocket malls and with all the congestion. And it's not so good what we do within the urban growth boundary. Are we going to need to rewrite the zoning laws so that it'll be able, which really lead us to the way we settle now? Or how would you address that? Or how are we going to get a better place to live with our present zoning laws?
Yes, we will have to change zoning, and it's actually being changed across the region. We have some experiments with projects underway, private sector experiments, and they found barriers to building a new kind of development. That was true for Fairview Village, and I think it's been the case for some of the West Side Light Rail stops. At the same time, you know, we talk about the role of government. The private sector in this nation is supposed to be enterprising and creative, and instead we see a tremendous amount of conservatism. Now, I understand it's easy to say, great, you want me to experiment, use your capital if you want to experiment, you know. That's a reasonable reaction. But there are ways, and I hope we do get leadership from the private sector to try new kinds of development, and I think that's happening now, and we're demonstrating the public really likes those new kinds of products. So it is not just a matter of government. We need a little more risk-taking from the banks, from the developers, secondary markets, so that we can build something, and I think the public will respond. In fact, the data shows that the public already is responding.
Thank you very much. That was our last question. Before we turn it back to Chris, I just want to say, in looking at the audience today, it reminds me that building this region has been and will continue to be a collective achievement. I see in this audience a wide range of people involved in getting up in the morning and making this region a better place to be. That's going to be the way that we're going to find our way to the future. I might also say that, you know, in looking through Brent Walt's wonderful biography of Tom McCall, I found no language in there where Tom McCall was waxing eloquent about being good at urban growth boundaries, or making sure that Oregon had a great jobs housing balance, or ensuring that our VMT, or it's not varmint miles traveled, it's vehicle miles traveled, you know, wasn't too high. I mean, it was about creating a truly remarkable place within which we could all live. That's what we've been striving for, and when these people come to visit us from around the world, they may come here to see what we did with an urban growth boundary, but I think we need to also remind them that we did it because of a commitment to a kind of place that we wanted this to be, and that continues to drive our involvement today. So thank you very much, and let me turn this back now to Chris Olson.
Actually, that answers my question, Ethan. When that bell was ringing, now we know it tolls for all of us.
Well, on that note, thank you, Robert, Ethan, and Susan for a most illuminating presentation. I remind you again, we're not meeting next Friday. Have a safe holiday and time with your family and friends, and we will see you on the 30th with Terrence Donnell. We're adjourned.